Bombings, civilian casualties, cities in ruins? Today's grim reality. But this Israel-Palestine conflict has ancient origins, maybe even older than your mother. Let's unravel this. The ancient origins of this conflict come from when the Code of Hammurabi was being etched into stone, setting the foundation for modern legal systems. The ancient Israelites around 1800 BCE established roots in Canaan, a region you might recognize as modern-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and parts of Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. It wasn't just a land grab, it was the birth of a people and a culture. But they weren't alone. Various Canaanite city-states and tribes, each with their own rich tapestry of culture and traditions, also called this slice of the Middle East home. Two distinct groups living side by side, as ever with humans, conflict would come. Wars enveloped the Jewish kingdoms around 1050 to 930 BCE. Think King David, Solomon, and other famous figures would originate from this period. First, they were annexed by the Egyptians. Then, in order, they faced invasion and/or varying degrees of conquest by the Assyrians, Babylonians, Achaemenid Persians, Alexander the Great's Greeks, and their Seleucid descendants, and finally the Romans, all of that only occurring during the ancient period. Peace was maintained under the Romans, however, even as the eastern provinces transitioned into the Byzantine Empire. Now, enter Islam at the dawn of the 7th century CE, with the Arab caliphates not far behind. They spread faster than wildfire, bringing a new religion, culture, and political structure to the region. Within years of their founding, they annihilated the Sassanid Persian Empire and seized many Byzantine lands, including the province of Judea, and even going as far as besieging Constantinople, but failing. The Middle East, however, was getting a makeover whether it liked it or not. However, even before the rise of Islam, Jews and Arabs had cohabited the region. You may think, great, a history lesson. But what's this got to do with today? Well, these events are the bedrock upon which grudges form. Remember that ancient feud we talked about? Well, fast forward a bit and we find ourselves in the reign of the Ottoman Empire. For over 600 years, the Ottomans had their fingers in the Middle Eastern pie, controlling a vast territory and maintaining relative peace between Arabs and Jews. But, as with all empires, the sun eventually began to set. World War I wasn't just about trench warfare and unfortunate moustache choices. For the Ottomans, it was the final nail in the coffin. Enter the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Well, it was the origin of the current round of hostilities. The British and French, ever the opportunists, decided to play a game of divide and conquer. They took out their crayons and began drawing borders like a mistreated coloring book. The result? A jigsaw puzzle of territories that made little to no sense, with various ethnic and religious groups being crammed together regardless of their sometimes violent differences. As for what it was like to live there, imagine waking up one day and finding out your house is suddenly in a different country. However, after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, Arab nationalism was on the rise, and they weren't thrilled about these new borders. They had dreams, such as a pan-Islamic or pan-Aramic Middle East. What would we call Islamism and Ba'athism, respectively? And then there was Zionism, a movement pushing for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The stage was set, and the actors were ready for a showdown. All that was needed was a spark, and when you mix local ambitions with a dash of colonial arrogance, you get a recipe for disaster. Europe was in ruins, and the echoes of World War II reverberated across the globe. The world, still smouldering from the fires of the most devastating conflict in history, provided this very spark in the form of a Jewish settlement in the region. Among the many tragedies of World War II, the Holocaust is one of the most quickly remembered. The survivors, scarred and traumatized, yearned for a place to call home. Before the war, before the Holocaust, there was already talk of a Jewish homeland, a glimmer of hope in the form of the Balfour Declaration. The British, in a move that was part promise and part political maneuvering, hinted at a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The catch: Palestine wasn't a vacant lot waiting for occupants. It had its own people, its own history, and the Palestinians had been there for centuries. Fast forward to the late 1940s. With the horrors of the war fresh in memory, Jews from Europe and other parts of the world started pouring into Palestine seeking refuge. Tensions only rose from there. The United Nations, newly formed and eager to assert its role in global peace, stepped into the Palestinian quagmire. In 1947, they decided to divide Palestine into Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem as an international hub. Despite Jews comprising only a third of the population and owning under 7% of the land, they were allocated 56% of it. The Arab territories were fragmented, interspersed with Jewish lands. This plan, while said to be balanced, was a powder keg waiting to explode. In 1948, the Jewish leadership declared the State of Israel, realizing a dream for many Jews, but for the Arab world, it was a stark nightmare, igniting the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Arab nations, including Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq, swiftly intervened. Their goal wasn't just opposing Israel, but championing Palestinian Arab rights. The Arab-Israeli War reshaped the Middle East. Despite the numerical disadvantage, Israel expanded south, while the West Bank and Gaza fell to Jordan and Egypt. This was the first of a long line of similar conflicts. The Israel-Palestine conflict of today is even more intricate, with a slew of nations and factions, each with their own stakes and strategies. Syria, historically entangled with Israel, has always had its eyes on reclaiming the Golan Heights. Their stance on the Israel-Palestine issue is, to put it mildly, frosty. Egypt, with its storied past of pharaohs and pyramids, had also had its share of confrontations with Israel, only having reclaimed Sinai in the 1973 Yom Kippur War after it was captured by Israel in the 1967 Six-Day War. However, in a surprising twist, they inked a peace treaty with Israel in 1979, a move that sent ripples across the Arab world despite the ceasefire previously in place. Jordan, often the voice of reason in the region, has had its disputes with Israel. Yet, in 1994, they too chose diplomacy over discord, signing a peace treaty. Their stance on Palestine, though, remains nuanced. Iran's narrative is more changed. Their ideological opposition to Israel is indisputable, and they've been known to back certain groups to amplify their regional influence. On the non-state actor front, Hamas is the most significant currently, emerging from the first Intifada seeking an Islamic state in historic Palestine. Their stronghold, Gaza. Their relations with Israel and the Palestinian Authority, tense, to say the least. The next most influential is Hezbollah, with roots in Lebanon and strong ties to Iran, has a multifaceted agenda. Opposing Israel, however, sits prominently on their list. ISIS, or Daesh, while primarily focused on establishing a global caliphate, has occasionally turned its attention to Israel and Palestine, though currently being far less influential than in the mid-2010s. Their presence in the Sinai Peninsula, bordering Israel, has been a cause for Israeli concern. They've launched sporadic attacks on Israeli targets, seeing Israel as an ultimate enemy, but not their immediate priority. Moreover, their propaganda often features anti-Israel rhetoric, vowing to liberate Jerusalem. After centuries of historical and religious significance, the region finds itself once again at the epicenter of modern-day tensions and conflicts, with Jerusalem itself a focal point for three major religions. The Israeli settlements in the West Bank, viewed by many as an infringement on Palestinian territories, have long been a source of conflict. The international community has often questioned the legality of these settlements and their implications for peace. The blockade of Gaza has further exacerbated tensions. This blockade has severely restricted access to basic necessities such as food and fresh water for the people of Gaza, leading to significant humanitarian concerns. Despite various international peace efforts, the situation has deteriorated. Recent events have seen increased skirmishes and escalations between the two sides. On October 18, 2023, an Israeli air attack targeted the El Ali Arab Hospital in Gaza, resulting in over 500 casualties. This attack was widely condemned. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas described it as a war massacre, while Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defended the action, suggesting Hamas was to blame. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for an immediate ceasefire. Further air raids in northern Gaza resulted in 37 additional casualties. Since the conflict began on October 7, the Israeli army has reported 2 military fatalities. Diplomatic efforts have been in motion to address the situation. A summit in Amman, Jordan, intended to bring together US President Joe Biden with Egyptian and Palestinian leaders, was cancelled. Protests have erupted in various locations, with significant demonstrations outside Israeli embassies in both Turkey and Jordan. The United Nations Security Council is set to vote on a resolution drafted by Brazil, which calls for humanitarian pauses in the conflict, allow aid access to Gaza. The U.S. State Department has initiated charter flights to assist Americans in leaving Israel. The Israeli-Gaza conflict is complex, with deep-rooted historical, religious, and political dimensions. But there's always hope. Hope that one day the cycle of violence will be broken and a lasting peace will prevail. We invite you to leave a comment with your thoughts on the matter.